Historically, it's been said that comics are subliterature for subliterates, but it's my belief that these are actually texts which, given that they can be used to address any age, any level of complexity and any subject, are far, far more than that. And we need to understand the comic differently, think about it as a medium rather than a genre, and think about it as a powerful way of expressing ideas, rather than seeing it as a fallback position to support those who are struggling.
So, can comics rise above a perceived poor relation status? Mel Gibson believes the form can encourage reading, especially amongst reluctant readers. So we asked her to conduct an experiment at Whitley Bay High School. Firstly, would stocking the library with comics and graphic novels encourage pupils to read more? And secondly, could two teachers new to the idea of comics in the classroom find ways of using the words and pictures to ease pupils into more complex texts?
When I first started here, I didn't know a huge amount about comics. Obviously, I knew about Batman, Superman, the Beano, that kind of thing. But the wide range of comics available, I really didn't know much about. But it wasn't until Mel came along that I realised there was so much stuff available. There are students coming in and looking at books that perhaps wouldn't use a library normally. They've heard that we've got comics in, they've seen that we've got things like manga, and while they're in here, they're discovering we've got other things, and they're also discovering the breadth of different titles available to them, and different sort of genres as well. And I think some are realising that it's not just a particular kind of look that the comics have, there's all kinds of different things.
Gareth has invited Mel to run a workshop talking to pupils about comics.
What I'd like to know is, what comics do you already know about? I mean, you can go as far back as you like in your life, or up to date. Are there any titles you know of? Beano, yeah. Asterix. Viz. Tintin. Think of the Beano, think of the Dandy, 6 to 9 panels on a page. How about? That's a bit different, isn't it? That is so huge. Comics can be a powerful tool to help readers engage with a whole range of possible worlds, boys and girls. It is also something that will help students connect with all sorts of challenges that they have within school, understanding texts that they're going to be examined on, as well as supporting their leisure reading. You've got these small events, and then you've got something like this. So what's going on here? Absolutely right, it's a bomb. Now here you've got thought balloons, and their memories of the Second World War are so big that it overwhelms everything else.
So does it work? Has placing comics in the library motivated pupils to read more?
I mostly just come up to the library to do my homework on the computer, as in sometimes I flick through the books, but with looking at the different wide ranges of comics and that, I think I'd be more inclined to come up now.
I think it would be quite good to get people, because a lot of people don't read, but get people reading because it's in comic styles.
Reading big books is not really my thing, but if I read comics it would be better, because you're also reading the writing, but you're looking at the pictures, which explains more.
I would say the impact that comics have had on the school in terms of reading generally has been really, really positive. Students who perhaps wouldn't maybe want to come to the library to take out a more traditional book have thought, oh right, there's graphic novels in there, we'll go and take out one of those. And that very process of them actually coming in here and following some of our procedures and systems is really beneficial for them, because it means they're engaging in the library, they're using a library. It doesn't really matter what they're using it for, but they're learning these skills which hopefully will benefit them in their education generally. We've noticed a raise in reading, so students will come in and take out the graphic novels, they will pass them amongst their friends. There are particularly popular ones which they all want to take out, so it engenders this real excitement about reading, about coming into the library and getting something which they're quite excited about.
The second part of the experiment takes place in the classroom. Two English teachers who are unfamiliar with the use of comics in the classroom have agreed to build them into their lessons. But first, Mel wants to find out what they know about the form. Is their knowledge limited only to comics they read in childhood?
For many teachers and librarians whose main experience of comics is of humour titles when they were very young, although there may be libraries that hold titles that they could use, they may not know about them. They may be unaware of what's out there.
I've used comics for text transformation, so we've taken a story and we've put it into a comic strip strip, and I've also sort of taken stories and they've rewritten them for a different audience, and
Excellent.
you know, that sort of, so they might take a story and produce something like The Snowman for children, because they have to understand the story to get it down to that sort of visual.
Yeah.
I grew up with comics and they were just part of my childhood, and I've always loved comics. I did not realise they were so complex, and my worry is that once I start delving into it any further, it'll just take over. There's so much to learn about comics. It's like a whole new learning experience.
These are the classical comics Macbeths. And what you have here is you've got 3 different versions. Original text, plain text and quick text.
Right.
So you can see how this might work. It's the same images throughout. So any given page, you've got the same business going on, but you've got a different language for each one. So you can compare and contrast.
I didn't have much experience of comics at all, really, and in complete honesty, I think I would have just brushed them aside and thought that there was something for children, even though I've had experience of reading them at university. Now I feel a bit overwhelmed, and so what's going through my mind at the moment is just basically how I would use it to help teaching and not to take over.
Having the sort of simpler text and then the original, if you could start students off on the simpler text, then you could move them on to the original, and hopefully that will help their understanding of the language of Shakespeare. Because the manga's so popular as well, even if you don't use it much for the study of the text, it's a great way of hooking them into it.
A comic is a misunderstood kind of text for the most part. There are a variety of different comics and different ways of talking about them, and some of these titles aren't terribly descriptive. One, graphic novel, emerged in the mid-1980s to describe work written for adults. At the same time, very recently, we've started to see a lot more manga in Britain. Now, manga's just the Japanese word for comics, and in Japan, 1/3 of all publishing is in that form, and as a consequence, there are a huge range of genres for adults and for children.
Maybe then they'd even consider their own interpretations and their own writing with a bit more confidence. If they know that you can interpret things in lots of different ways, then they might be more free to suggest their own ideas
to
and
have
things like that.
To speculate about. That's something that even the brightest kids sometimes are reluctant to say what they think because they don't want to be wrong. Well, if they know there's all these different versions of it, these different interpretations, it might just give them the confidence to go with it.
I'm excited about getting some more interest in text, like maybe manga and comics and things that they will pick, I know, because they'll think it's a relief from reading, but actually it won't be, and I've realised now that it won't be.
Reading in it.
Yeah.
1 month later, we returned to the school to see how the teachers had used the comics and graphic novels in lessons and what impact they had made.
You've seen these before, and you've seen examples of Macbeth as a comic, so this should be really easy.
Faye Robinson has used comics to help teach Shakespeare. Pupils are asked to draw Act 1 of Macbeth in a graphic novel style.
The big ones more important bits, and then the littler ones not as important.
Yeah, you've got close-up on people's faces here as well, haven't you? And they're having a conversation, so maybe it's more important that you look closely at them. So you could have something like that for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, couldn't you, when they're talking? Everything about teaching Shakespeare is emphasising how to make it fun, how to make it interesting, how to make sure students aren't switched off from it, and that's a really good way of doing it. And I think they're going to take maybe a deeper understanding of Act 1 just by focusing on it in this way. Your task for the next 20 minutes is to work as a group with the people on your table to make your own version of Act 1.
I'll grab a box somewhere you can explain what the scene's about.
Yeah.
And him thinking that he's going to become king, and then we can do the one where he's thinking about killing the king, and then the scene where he kills the king.
I was worried after speaking to Mel. I had so many different ideas, and I didn't want that to overtake English as the primary subject, because I thought I could get totally carried away and end up just teaching a module on the graphic novel. So I've sort of drip-feeded it a little bit, and maybe not done as much as I could have done, but I think now it's certainly just even introducing the scene by showing them a page of a graphic novel instead, just something like that is a different way, and obviously you need to accommodate different learning styles and things like that. Then it's an extra tool that you can use in the classroom, I think, and I'm much more open to doing it now.
Are the pupils more enthusiastic about learning Shakespeare if comics are introduced into the lesson? The experiment appears to have had some success.
If you're reading the play, then it's quite hard to work out the meaning of each different line, but if you've got comics, then you've also got the pictures, so you can catch the gist even if you don't understand all the words.
I'd rather read Macbeth now as a comic rather than just reading it, because to be honest I think it's quite boring. But if you've got pictures, it just livens it up a little bit.
We did just the end of Act 1 a couple of times and we watched it on the video, and then we did it with the comics and stuff, and I got more out of it after we'd done it with the comics, because you get a different side. It's not a different side of the story, but it's told in a different way, so I think you understand it better.
In Lynn Smith's class, pupils are exploring how comics are constructed, studying the conventions and features of the form.
How do graphic novels and comics guide you to following the story in the order they want them to? How do you demonstrate thoughts and speech? Think carefully about the pictures. And how can you show emotions in comics and graphic novels? Let's think about the pictures that you're going to be using. Zinni?
Most pictures there's lots of detail in it, so instead of description, and they're all some novels, there aren't real pictures, like photos, it's a bit cartoony, but they're always doing big actions and there's big scenery bits.
Right, so everything in the pictures is quite exaggerated, isn't it? So, are you all ready to be creative? After the meeting with Mel last month, I sort of started to look at comics in a new light, and I actually started seeing things in comics that I hadn't seen before. When I told the class that they were going to do comics, the instant problem was, what about the ones who don't like drawing? I tried to get them to team up with using their skills, pairing up together, but they haven't always got that quite right, so I can see that possibly being the biggest barrier to their success.
I don't normally draw because I don't really like it, but doing the comics in English, it's quite good because we get a chance to do it in English, which makes it more interesting.
With Shakespeare, it's you're trying hard to understand the language, so you're not really enjoying what you're doing. Whereas if we're doing comics, it's you understand it already, so it's easier to learn and pick up new things.
There's some books that I wouldn't have read a few months ago, but because we're doing loads of different stuff in English, I want to read them now.
Some young people are just resistant to reading, full stop. It's very hard. It's hard to know how to get them into it. And I have to say that comics has always been a way in. I've been reluctant in the past because I've thought it's a bit too easy to just pick up a comic and read, and they're actually looking at pictures and not reading. But it has got some students into reading, and some actually have borrowed some of the graphic novels rather than comics. They've borrowed the graphic novels to take away and read, and somebody reading a graphic novel of Frankenstein might well get them into the book, I hope.
Doing something like this brings it into their context, and comics might be something that they've seen in childhood or something that they read all the time anyway, and so it makes them understand that Shakespeare isn't alien. Quite a lot of the storylines and quite a lot of the subjects are still relevant today, so that helps them understand that it's something that they can relate to.